Thank you guys all for coming back after dinner last night, and excited for another day. So this morning we're kicking off with Andrew Strong. For those of you who don't know, Andrew Strong is a partner at Hogan Lovells. He is involved, and I think he has listed with just a tremendous number of the startups and companies that happen around here, both as a representation directly, but also really relevant to today's topic in licensing deals. I've worked with Andrew before. He's amazing to work with, just incredibly knowledgeable. He's also just been tremendously impactful in the community as a whole, and is one of the people responsible for the fact that we even have CFRT here in Texas, and getting that through, and also on the review panels and for the product development grants. So a tremendous source of knowledge. There's many other things that Andrew has done that I haven't had all of my coffee this morning, so I'm probably not fully remembering it. So I'm going to pass it over to the man of the hour.
All right. Thank you. We have 1 hour, is that right?
Hour and a half.
Oh, hour and a half?
Yes.
Oh boy, it's gonna be fun. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about intellectual property. I'm not an intellectual property lawyer, but I know enough to be dangerous. But really, I'm gonna talk about, you've had a number of kind of sessions where you talked about business development, about, how to start up a company. I'm gonna kind of dial back from early on in the formation of a company, and kind of where I spend a lot of time is working with PIs, investigators, and institutions, and people that are outside institutions that want to extract technology from an institution and drop it into a company and start up the company. And it sounds like a pretty simple deal, just to go grab a license from your institution, put it in your company, and get rolling. But I want to start with kind of the idea of putting it into a company, because what you'll know, or what you probably already know, and I'm assuming many of you are kind of in this space or kind of bridging this space where you got an idea or you're working on something and you want to take it out, or you want the institution to take it out. I'm going to focus on, where you take the intellectual property, put it into a new co, and build that new co around the intellectual property. And most of my experience is really in drug development, do some device and diagnostic, but really drug development, where it really requires significant amounts of money, like millions of dollars of money, to get something from in the new co and carry it forward, because it's all about stepping up. You've got time issues, you've got money issues, you've got science issues, you've got personnel issues. All these things have to come together at the right time, at the same time, because if you drop IP into a company but you haven't planned for it to come into the company properly, you'll hit some stumbling blocks. And so my background, just to give you guys, since we have an hour and a half, I'll go into a little more detail. My background's an engineer. I went to A&M, got a civil engineering degree, and I like building things. And so I really was thinking I want to be, a home builder, custom home builder when I got out of college. And so I ended up going into the science side of engineering, and particularly in environmental engineering. I really love the science. I love the interaction of chemicals in the environment, and so I kind of went into environmental engineering. And then ultimately I found my way to biotech in the early 2000s, where I was working, for Texas A&M University when the biolabs were shut down by the CDC after the Bioterrorism Act. And ultimately went into A&M as the general counsel in 2009. And one of the things we did is we decided we wanted to start up a company that would take responsibility for building out manufacturing in this new facility called the National Center for Therapeutics Manufacturing, which is in College Station. So I'm kind of the joke about A&M, it's ready, fire, aim, which often happens at A&M. But the intentions are great because A&M is always looking to kind of move things forward. Sometimes it stumbles forward, but sometimes, you know, it does good planning. And so we started up this new co, and I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I was an engineer, lawyer, and now I jumped over and I was the founding CEO of this company called Kalon Biotherapeutics. And I was handed a very small bag of cash and a 150,000 square foot building, and I was told, go get it up and running, get it validated, you know, go attract business. You know, so this was a CDMO, contract development manufacturing organization. And so we had to raise capital immediately because we already were out of money, even with the seed money that A&M gave us. We had to secure significant contracts. We were participating in this big BARDA proposal for one of the centers of innovation, advanced development manufacturing. And so it was like all out sprint. Hiring people, you know, back in 2011, there's not many people in Texas that know how to do, you know, GMP manufacturing, process development, analytical development, quality control, all quality assurance, all these things about starting up a company just kind of hit me in the face. And of course I said, I'll do it when I was asked, hey, will you go start up this company? It should be really easy. That was I think I went 3 lifetimes during that period of trying to get, you know, just trying to figure out what I was doing, frankly, because I started a law firm. I never started a company like that, and it was very high profile at the time because, you know, the Governor Perry had allocated $50 million to build this new facility, and failure was not an option, and so we had to find a way to make it through. And so, by the grace of God, we were able to secure the right people. We were able to secure funding. And we were chasing after 3 things. And so I like, when building a business, and I'm kind of going, but this really isn't about IP, but I'll get there. But building a business is all about not diluting yourself. I think the biggest thing I took away is not diluting myself in terms of what I was trying to accomplish. And this isn't economic dilution or equity dilution. This is attention dilution. When you start up a company, you have to focus and you have to be deliberate. And I learned the hard way, you know, running Kalon. You know, I thought, oh, well, we have this great shiny building, you know, it'll be no problem. But what I really found out, you know, whether it's science, building, equipment, ideas, it's about the people. If you don't recruit the right people, and to come into your company, and if you don't have the people skills to communicate across the aisle, and like in this case, it's communicating across the aisle to your institution or to an institution that you want to license IP from, you know, it's going to be challenging. And so we ultimately, I set 3 objectives. I said, look, we're going to be successful if we can get this big BARDA grant contract, or get a big pharmaceutical transaction, or a big academic institution for collaboration. And so we were pursuing MD Anderson for a collaboration, we were pursuing GSK vaccines for a big project, and we were pursuing BARDA, the federal government, for this large center contract. And I always said it was like, you know, we're like just a couple of, you know, scientists, engineers, lawyers jumping in a Suburban and chasing down the road after these big things. And we got all 3. And then I was like, okay, how are we going to implement this? And so, you know, it's building a business just like in your labs and your science. You've got to focus. And so we focused on, you know, really, you know, doing what we think we can do best, and really hiring the people. And so at that time, the company wasn't built around IP, but it was built around an idea and a business plan. IP was important because we had these kind of next generation biomanufacturing facilities that we're working with, and these are what's called mobile clean rooms in these pods, and that was our distinguisher. And so, we had to go get the IP around that. We secured it, and that was critical because ultimately, when we sold the company to what's now Fujifilm Diosynth Biotechnology in College Station, it was critical that we had all these pieces in place, and that when we started the company on day one, I was like, because I was a lawyer and engineer, I'm kind of very focused on process and details, and that we got to have all the paperwork in line. We have to have, our equity very straightforward. We don't want to do anything that's going to create a stumbling block when we get to this exit. And, had we not done certain things early, it would have really caused a problem in selling the company. And it just kind of reflected on me that, yeah, I made a lot of mistakes and I learned lessons the hard way because you tend to remember more. But, starting your company, the early days of your company, and particularly getting the license, the IP in your company, because if you're a biotech and you're a drug developer, the company in the early days, it's all about the IP. I mean, the IP underpins everything that's in your company. Then you get the IP in, and then of course, IP is not just patents. IP is know-how, it's knowledge. It could be non-patented stuff like trade secret, how to manufacture a drug. I mean, that's important. And so, if you think about it from the perspective of building this company, I'm going to go into a few slides on starting a company, just because it's ingrained in me as a lawyer, and you'll have to bear with me about what are the things to do when you're in the early days of the startup. But what's most important is that the company has zero value, no value, until you drop the IP into the company. Even though it's an exchange, it's a negotiated exchange for upfront milestones, royalties, there's no value in the company unless it has something to value around. And so when you do your financing and you raise capital into the company, you want to do it at a valuation bump, and the initial valuation of a biotech company is going to be driven by the IP in the company, not so much what the company has done, because the company's not done anything at that point. It's only as good as the IP that's in the company. And so let me, a little bit about me, you can look at that later. So just a little bit about the firm I'm with, Hogan Lovells. I have been practicing law since 1994, and most of it in last 15 years has been in biotech, infectious disease, oncology, genetic diseases. I've been on the manufacturing side, process development, analytical development, so I know that space really well, doing preclinical work. So I kind of have a variety of experience. Hogan Lovells is a very large firm, global firm of 3,000 lawyers, and there are literally 500 lawyers, believe it or not, that do life sciences work. And so the regulatory piece, both in the US, and I just came to appreciate, just recently, how critically important planning your regulatory pathway for your company early is so important. Developing your clinical plan, how is that going? This all goes to your next step. How are you going to get to the next step? You got to prove that you created value. That way investors will come in. And then and then as you get better data, as you get into the clinic, you build up. So the firm I'm with now, we have, I think probably the best life sciences practice globally. We have 5-6 lawyers in Texas that are full-time life science, from regulatory, IP, corporate. Enough of the sales ad. But a lot of the companies that we work with, and Sarah had mentioned CPRIT, and so if you're in oncology or pursuing something on the fringes of oncology, CPRIT is definitely a great source. And I've been working with CPRIT since almost 2009 when it came out, and then worked with the executive team at CPRIT when we reauthorized it 2 years ago. And so it's got another 10 years of runway. And technically, Seabrook should be funding $300 million a year as their budget. They should be funding 60 to 70 million in product development. That's going to companies that are developing new novel products in oncology. And so if you're ever contemplating, submitting a Seabrook grant, there's the seed grants and there's the 2 product development grants, which since you're already here in Texas, you wouldn't need to reload grant, but it's up to $20 million in funding, and there's some matching requirements. So I'd love talking to you about Seabrook. You may already have that on your agenda. Well, this is a Seabrook funded course, so there you go. But I also serve as the co-chair of the Product Development Advisory Committee of Seabrook, and probably of the 40 plus companies, and some of them here you'll see are Seabrook funded companies, of the 40 plus companies that receive Seabrook grants, I probably have represented 3/4 of them in some form or fashion. And so the application process can be challenging. It's very detailed. Don't apply for Seabrook unless you have a really good accounting system, because you're going to be held to a high standard for tracking your costs. We can go into the Q&A if y'all want to talk about Seabrook. I can give you everything there is to know about Seabrook. I've seen everything over the last 10 years and happy to share that knowledge.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the success rate for seed development grant?
That is a good question. The last round they didn't award any, so it's a $3 million grant, which you have to match $1.5 million. I would say.
I think they only got a couple applications last round though.
Yeah.
When they reported it.
Yeah, I mean, I have been working, so the review panel needs to push more through. I would say about 10%. Yeah, it should be higher. It should be about 15 to 20%. But if you apply for one?
Not yet, but
okay.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, has anybody applied for a seed grant? Shaltong, I know you have. Yeah, it's a lot of work, isn't it? Yeah. And so, there's a lot of collective wisdom in this room that can help you do that. But whether it's the challenge with Seabrook is that they place the same standard of review for a seed grant as they do for the larger grants. And they're effectively the same application. So the 3 legs of the Seabrook stool are the science, the management team, and the competitive landscape. Kind of knowing your indication, knowing that you're running a race that you can ultimately get to the finish line in front of others if you're successful. And the seed grant is for really up through, almost up to IND, because it's just not gonna fund enough, $4.5 million total project for Seabrook for a seed grant. Doesn't get you into the clinic, or get you really, if you're a biologic, doesn't get you a whole lot of manufacturing, but it will get your analytical development and process development done. Any more questions about Seabrook before we jump forward? All right, so this is a slide. So when I was a young lawyer, my kind of mentor told me, Andrew, it's not about the velocity of your career, it's about the trajectory, early on in your days. And so I've taken that, which is true, because if you come out of the gun low, you're not gonna make it too far. You'll make it fast somewhere, but you won't make it farther. And I kind of taken that and modified it in the context of biotech. And this goes to kind of the discussion we'll talk. You got to go fast and high. I mean, because you have to outrun, outshoot everybody else that you're racing against. Because your idea, and unless you're just, incredible, no one like you, someone else is working on the same indication or the same type of disease or similar technology. And you're going to get, when you get into the funding and you're looking at the VCs and you're looking at the people who are going to invest in you, they're going to categorize you. Because if you're too far out there, and I love being out there. I mean, there's this article that was written by David Brooks, editor of New York Times, called The Creative Monopoly. I think it was done, about 10 years ago. It's great, look it up. because he talks about Peter Thiel, who is one of the founders of PayPal, who says, you know, don't just be marginally better than your competitor. You know, go somewhere on the canvas where no one is and try to stake out that space. And I love that imagery, because if you're out there where no one else is and you really succeed, you're going to have for a period of time a creative monopoly around, or you're going to have a way bigger head start than everybody else. The challenge with that in biotech is that if you're too far out there and you don't have any, there's no, nothing written about the technology, that's been there's not accepted in the scientific community. The people who are going to write you the big checks are going to be like nervous. Well, what if this doesn't succeed? I'm not going to. So you want to be out there far enough, but you want to be able to point to validation of your target or validation of your technology by other research that's going on in the world and other esteemed researchers. And so being out there is great. I love it. But if you're going to be out there in the white spot of the canvas where no one is, you got to make sure that you got enough money to validate and prove your technology so that you can get to the next financing round. And I hate the fact that advancing technology and science is driven by the amount of money that you can raise. So we all know it's expensive. I mean, it really, people, equipment, materials, it all takes time and money, and so those are the two things that you're racing against as you develop your science. So anyway.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So with Secret's perspective, so if you are far enough in the canvas, for example, you have created monopoly, how does Secret see it?
I think you're going to bring us back to Secret. I think they like that. Yeah, but the reviewers are people like you and me, and they're like, okay, well, they're not really graded on their successes and failures like venture is, or someone who's running an investment fund. But if they have a big failure, it's kind of embarrassing to them. So they want to pick the right ones. And just so you know, and this will go into a little bit of Secret, and since we have time, we'll spend it on this. But there's two panels of Secret reviewers. There's, let's say, A and B, and there's 12 in each panel. There's advocate reviewers, so these are people who represent the patients, so they're kind of looking at, okay, how's this going to help the patient? There's kind of the scientific reviewers, there's the business reviewers, and so if your application goes into Secret, and let's say there's 20 seed applications, they're going to kind of break them up into kind of technology, where you are, kind of what you're doing, and then they're going to hand it to, of the two panels, they're going to split them up. And then they're going to say, okay, they're going to assign 3 people and an advocate reviewer to review your application. And so they're going to look at it from their own personal biases, even though they're supposed to be kind of think broadly, we're here to help, bridge the gap, with companies that need funding at this time. So so how you present your Secret application is so important to focus, and so you should get counsel. Sarah and others, they can really help you kind of make sure you hit all the high points. But they're charged under the Texas Cancer Plan to look for unmet clinical needs, right? So liver cancer is a big issue in Texas, in South Texas. I mean, so that's on their mind. And so if you're in such a small, indication where there's not a high patient population, they are going to look at the fact that, well, even if we funded this company to get to GLP tox or to an IND, can this company even go further? I mean, if it's in such a small indication, how are they going to raise more money, right? I mean, so they are thinking about, all right, it's this tension between unmet clinical need and the ability to advance the technology beyond just Secret, right? Because Secret, and so one of the things that's going on in Secret right now, and the Product Development Committee has been advising them on, they really want to help take the seed grants and seed more companies, and then have those companies be the feeder to the larger grants, right? But you gotta be able still to raise capital outside of secret. And even if you get a $3 million seed grant, you still have to raise another $1.5 million to match. And as Shaw Tong will tell you, working with secret's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, it can be challenging at times in terms of their structure. Once there's kind of the part of secret where you get your application approved and everybody's, oh yay, great, we got a secret award, and then you have to implement. You have to advance the technology pursuant to what you told them, like goals and objectives, and you have to set those. And the one thing about any drug development that everybody knows, if you've done this at all, is that it never follows a linear path, right? I mean, it's like, something happens, all right, we gotta do another study, our timeline's, posed by 6 months. And so secret's getting better about adapting to those changes, but it's still problematic because they're like, well, so a client of mine who's a secret awardee has a technology, and I won't describe it too much so you can figure out who it is, but they have a payload that's being delivered to cancer cell. And so the vehicle that's driving the payload changed because it was a biologic, it was very expensive to make, it was going to delay the process. They went to a small molecule drug to deliver the payload. CBRT thought that was a material change in the application from what they originally proposed. Now, we ultimately got CBRT around, but you got to really propose what you're going to do. And there's some modifications, but you can't change. You can change the indication if you think that it needs to change based upon the data. But I got a little bit off track there, but I don't know if that answered your question. Okay.
Thank you.
Any more secret questions? Feel free to ask anytime. Yes.
So thank you for the information. The reviews 1 and 2 are good for the secret. There is the first review, then there is an interview. The third one they said some IP review. So 2 times we were got in that round, we never go through. So what are they looking in the third one?
I'm sorry. What are they? What?
The diligence
The first
review, what are they
review
looking
basic
for?
science, then they
What are they looking for?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. I talked about the reviewers, so they grade you.
no, sorry, the diligence review, he said the
Oh,
third
diligence,
round of
yes,
review.
diligence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The diligence review, what are they looking for?
Oh,
He's
during the
asking
diligence. Oh, so you've made it past orals.
Yes.
Congratulations. So the diligence review, it's kind of 2 things. One, I mean, they hire a consultant. They've been using ICON for years. I mean, as long as I know, at least 10 years. The ICON will look at you, depending upon what your application, they're going to look at the preclinical data. They're going to look at the CMC information. They're going to look at the management team. They're going to look at the clinical plan. So those are the 4 main areas that ICON will look at. And they'll generate a report. They'll show you the draft. They may ask you questions. And I kind of look at every stage at CPRIT, like the first application when that goes in. So everybody knows there's a CPRIT applications going in today, right? Today's the deadline for the seed and the product development awards. So what will happen after today, and I'll just kind of walk you all through this. Is it okay if I talk about CPRIT? We'll get to IP in a minute, but which is a good thing because we need to keep it short. I'm not an IP lawyer. So the CPRIT process is kind of 3 main steps. There's the application step, which if you've submitted, you're in now. And we can talk about the seed award, what you should be shooting for versus the larger award. But seed award just kind of proof of concept, kind of from today to IND, kind of that gap. And then the bigger awards is, I say, usually 18 months from IND forward, up to like phase 2. So right now they're going to get the applications, they're going to break them up into groups. They're going to review them, and a really good CPRIT score, a perfect CPRIT score is a 1. A horrible CPRIT score is a 10, right? If you score a 3 or below, you will likely be advanced to orals, okay? And they're going to look at it for the 3 things I talked about: the science, the management team, and the competitive landscape. Those are the there's other stuff, but those are, I think, probably the primary things. So once they score you, so like the little pods of reviewers, they'll all kind of come back together, and then they'll kind of just rank them all based upon their score. And they'll separate, they'll have a cutoff. Sometimes it's 3 or below, maybe it's a little bit higher based upon the number of applications. And then those people will be invited to orals. And in this case, orals will be in April. So you'll get notified late March, early April that you've been invited to orals. They'll send you, the reviewers, the 4 reviewers will send you, you'll get a bunch of questions saying, answer this, 1 through 10, maybe 15, but you don't have a whole lot of questions. You'll prepare a slide deck that will answer all those questions. You'll do an update, and then you'll submit it to them, and then you'll go to orals. So getting to your diligence. And so the orals will be, now you've gone from a total of 25 to 30 applications to maybe 7 or 8 are going to orals. It's a 40-minute presentation followed by questions, and you have to treat orals like it's starting over from ground zero. Like you gotta just nail it. This is your chance to really they either like you a lot or they say, not so much. Coming out of orals, let's say there's 7 or 8 go to orals, 3 or 4 to go to diligence, and you'll be notified a week later, basically, that you've been advanced to diligence. That's when they hire ICON and the legal counsel. The lawyers, talk about ICON, the lawyers will look at all your intellectual property. They'll look at your licenses, anything that's important from a legal perspective to advance the company. So if you've got, let's say you're licensing a cell line, they'll want to look at that, and they'll want to look at the IP. And they're usually pretty good on that, pretty quick. The ICON piece takes a lot of time. You have to treat that diligence like it's starting over. And here's the reason why. The Product Development Review Committee is a committee of 6 people. They all live outside the state of Texas. They're consultants to CPRIT. And they will get all, CPRIT itself, the employees of CPRIT do not make any decisions on applications. The PDRC and the panels do. So the panels vet the applications up to the orals. At the orals, they'll vote. Each kind of cohort or panel A or panel B will vote to advance theirs, whether it's seed or product development. The PDRC is important, and diligence is super important because the PDRC, two members of the 6-member PDRC may be in panel A and 2 in panel B. It's usually the chair, like David Shoemaker and Jack Pilkowski have been there forever. So the PDRC will get the diligence report from ICON and the lawyers. And they will look at the application almost like it's brand new. And they'll look at the diligence report. And you'll have, if your application goes to diligence, there'll be a lead reviewer from that very early group who will travel with your application all the way to the PDRC. And they will make their case to the PDRC if they're your advocate and if there's no red flags that come out of diligence. And then the PDRC will either go thumbs up or thumbs down. And they don't decide, they make recommendations. And this will happen, in this case, probably around July. So for this round, a new round will open up in the summer, and the decision on funding for that one will be in February of 23.
Hey, can I make a recommendation, Andrew?
Yeah.
Because this is really good on information, but I want to make sure that because I think the licensing is so important for them to be eligible to get through diligence.
Yeah.
We're talking about CPRIT, guys, in March, and Andrew doesn't know it yet, but I was going to pester him about coming back in March as well. So we're going to have an opportunity for a lot more questions. I don't mind having them as part of the questions, but I want to make sure we at least get through what we're trying to get through today.
IP. Back to IP.
Licensing. IP.
All right, so I gave you the 101 on secret process. So I want to start about launching a startup biotech. And this is getting a little legal, it's not IP, but it sets the framework. So the 2 type of corporations that you form when you're a NewCo is either a C Corp or an LLC. If anybody tries to sell you on anything else, tell them they're crazy and go home. Like B Corp, it's called a benefit corporation. It's a whole different set of rules. And really, this is just the difference. I mean, if you're going to attract foreign investors, C Corp. If you are a asset-based company, C Corp. C Corp, C Corp, C Corp. LLC is really for services. So if you're going to do diagnostic services or something like that, or in some cases, platform technology. Now, there are some unique things to think about as an investigator or someone who's taking technology out. If you have lots of ideas or lots of things that you want to commercialize, there's a strategy where you can set up an LLC, and that be your LLC. You develop your technology in that LLC, and then you license it to a NewCo, C Corp. So one asset. Let's say you have 5 assets. Put one asset into it, and then you fundraise into that C Corp. And the reason is, as founders, I'm sure as founders, all of you have heard about people who've been diluted out of all their founder shares and got basically nothing at the end of the day because of the massive dilution. The important aspect of setting up this LLC, which is you, all you, licensing that technology to the NewCo, is that you're going to get a non-dilutable royalty and maybe some milestones for that licensing deal into your NewCo. Now you can do as many NewCos as you want, taking your technology and your ideas into the C Corp. So it's an elegant way for founders to avoid massive dilution, which does happen.
So I have a question here. So most of us are academic investigators, so we license technology from universities. Now we have LLC, we license it, and now you're suggesting that if we go for C Corp, another licensing, that
Yeah.
will complicate the process.
Well, okay, so this is an interesting question. I'm actually working with an investigator, MD Anderson, right now on this same structure. The institution owns the IP, right?
Yeah.
Right, because you're in the institution, it owns the IP. The only way to get the IP out of the institution is through the tech office, we'll talk about that in a minute, and then license it. So they generally will not license it to you directly, right? They want to license it, the TTOs want to find some, an entity that has the ability to carry the technology forward so it just doesn't kind of hit the ground and nothing happen. But if you've got you as an LLC, you have ideas, you may have new ideas. You have to make sure, and as a former general counsel of an institution, if you can't sit in your lab, conceive ideas, and then go into your company and then patent them, right? Because it's going to be a problem. I mean, there's whole policies around doing that. But let's say you're focused on, a certain molecule in your lab, and all your research funding is coming in for that molecule, but you have some other ideas you want to explore that are separate and apart from what you're doing in your lab. You can do that. There's nothing to prevent you to do that. You need to have a good COI management plan in place with the institution. You want to tell them, this is what I'm going to do. And that way there's no dispute between you and the institution later if you are successful. And so, for example, the PI I'm working with now to set up this structure, he's focused on cancer, but he also has some of the stuff that he's learned in developing the molecules in cancer relate to longevity, right? And so he wants to pursue some longevity IP in his own LLC, and he's already got a pharma partner who's very interested in partnering with him. So rather than do the C Corp directly, which he'll own the majority of, we're going to develop his ideas in his LLC. The LLC will license it to the C Corp. The C Corp will do a deal with the pharma company, right? So he'll still have equity in the C Corp, but it's going to get diluted down to squat after hundreds of millions of dollars come into it, and we all hope that happens. But what's not diluted is that license of his ideas and his IP he's developed outside of his lab, in this LLC. Okay, so just kind of another thing that's for you to know: ownership in a C Corp is stock. Ownership in an LLC are units. Just same effective thing, but they're unique and different in the way that they operate. Question?
Very interesting to talk about this MD Anderson case. So, from what I have known, and we have clearly told us that any idea you created belongs to MD Anderson, even during your shower time at home. So basically, what I understand that no matter what you are doing, since you are working at MD Anderson, what do you think of, what you have created, whatever idea you have belongs to MD Anderson.
Are you at MD Anderson?
Yes. Because we specifically asked them, you know.
Well, okay, I can talk with you about that. I mean, I know what they say, but have you looked at the UT system Regents policies on IP? I mean, a lot of what people say doesn't always match what legal
Right, yeah.
and what's in the policies.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Like legally,
Yeah.
policy-wise, whether this is.
Right. But there are ways to, I mean, I would never say do things kind of subvertly or anything like that. I'm a total transparency guy. I mean, I want to make sure that there's zero question that what I'm doing over here is different from what I'm doing over here. But you know, if you go ask the question without really knowing the answer, you're gonna get an answer back that's gonna be like what you said. I mean, so you gotta be well informed. And you know, I could spend a whole day talking about university policies on IP. When I was general counsel at A&M, I drafted it was Reg 17.1, which was the IP policy. They probably changed it since then for A&M. And you know, every institution has different policies. The Baylor College of Medicine's policy is different from the UT system, from the A&M system. They all have kind of the same elements, though.
Andrew, can maybe what you can expand on is the fact that they are in fact allowed to assign intellectual property and things outside the institution, because they're allowed to consult for other companies as long as they file the conflict of interest.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm sure many of you are on scientific advisory boards for companies, or you do that kind of consulting work. You do a COI, right? Your scientific advisory board agreement with the company has to be reviewed by the COI office. And MD Anderson, you know, kind of had between Ron DePino and Peter Pisters has had kind of a geologic shift. I mean, before that it was Mendelsohn and then DePino. And so all institutions kind of have their policies that are locked in, but they also have their ways in which they interpret it. Now, MD Anderson is a little bit more tighter on the COI issues than they have historically been. But it varies from institution to institution. A&M, UT Health Science Center, Baylor College of Medicine, UT Southwestern. And this is going to go to my conversation about the tech offices, because they all change. I mean, some are much better at pushing technology out than others. And, you know, to the point where I want to just bang my head against the wall dealing with some of the tech offices. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
So I understand the strategy you just described, developing an IP in the LLC. But back to his question, what if the IP is already owned by the institution? Does this still
Yeah.
work?
So the model I talked about doesn't work.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But it does work because, so long as if you're going to consult with the company, let's say the IP comes into the new co through a license from the institution that you are a major owner of. And so we did one 2 years ago, another PI out of MD Anderson licensed 3 assets from MD Anderson. A bispecific, a STING, and a BB1. So you can get IP into your own company that your institution will license. What you can do, like I was saying, if you're taking a different tact on the same theme in your own LLC, you can create your own IP there, right? And your ideas and working with partners. And so it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. And so it's got to be unique to kind of your program. But
the key point here is to disclose the conflict of interest with the institutions and make sure there's no COI with the
Exactly.
Very early on.
Yeah, you're going to go and have a conversation with the people in the institution. You got to pick the right people to have that initial conversation with. If you just go ask, someone who's a compliance person, they're going to go no.
Yeah.
And so you really, this requires some planning early on. So the IP really does you form this company, whether it's a LLC or a C Corp, it has zero value on the day you form it. It's just a company on paper. The IP that you license into the company creates the value. And so, even with trademarks, if you have a name of the company, you want to protect that. And then that is going to be the catalyst in which you advance the company, whether it's preclinical to clinical to, registration. So these are all the things that you have to do. And then the relationships you form, you may need to attract more IP into the company as you develop your drug, whether it's cell line license or other type of vector if you're doing some type of gene therapy. And so you've got to have this kind of IP strategy that starts from day one. So the early days of your startup, kind of as I talked before, the key elements are bringing in a management team. Usually if you're in an institution right now and you're going to stay there, you've got to make sure that you've got the right people that you've selected to lead this company, that you will likely be the majority owner of, at least in its early days. And I always say that, when you're forming a company and you find the right CEO or person who's going to carry it forward, make sure that you really like this person, that you trust this person, because it's going to be, you're handing your IP, your baby, to this person to carry forward. And then they have to build the management team around them. They have to go get the financing, and kind of just a little bit off track here. Okay, we're doing on time. Okay, we're good. When I was the CEO of the biotech I started up, I went to this CEO conference, and I was still wet behind the ears. I didn't know what I was doing. And this guy, very experienced entrepreneur, says, "Does anybody know what CEO stands for?" I'm like, okay, yeah, it's pretty simple. He goes, Chief Exit Officer. And so I was like, God, that kind of makes sense, because the CEO can't be the person initially in a very, very small company, they have to do it all, wear multiple hats, help drive the science, but really the CEO is kind of like the head coach of a football team or a soccer team. They've got to have their assistant coaches, they've got to have their players, they're a manager. And their goal in the sports world is to win the Super Bowl, win the World Cup, whatever. The CEO's goal in biotech is to increase value, to raise capital, to exit the company. The vast majority of biotech companies, unless you're like a cell therapy company, where you actually have to kind of almost do it yourself, the vast majority of biotechs, the ultimate goal is to sell yourself to big pharma so they can carry the ball forward and take it global. So early days are super, super important to, just from a legal documentation perspective. I know this is like mind-numbing, but you've got to make sure all your governance is in place for your company, all your financing is in place, because it can totally handicap you if you haven't done it right. And that means hiring expensive lawyers, accountants, but it's worth it to do it right, because if you do get to a point where you're having an exit, and even when my company, and I'm a lawyer, engineer, and I look after everything like it was, very engineerish, we still had problems. We had things that came up when we were selling the company. And so, they were all solvable, but I've seen it where I've come in and helped, early stage companies with exits or major financings, and we kind of hit some of these insolvable roadblocks that stop the ability of the company to move forward. And so it's important to really get all this stuff lined up. Don't sign agreements just because you trust the person. Make sure you get advisors to help you before you, particularly manufacturing. Getting bad data in a preclinical study, you still have to disclose that to your investors. So if you don't design these things right and from the beginning, it can create problems. So we've talked about non-dilutive. That's kind of the secret stuff. That's awesome. We love it. Even debt is non-dilutive. A lot of early stage companies, and the next slide I'll talk about, is the dilutive is mean that if you own 50% of a $10 million, let's say you own 100% of a $10 million company, pre-money company. Pre-money means the value of your company, now you have your IP in the company, for your next financing. And I want everybody to know, so everybody know, y'all had the discussion on the difference between common stock and preferred stock?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So preferred stock, the value of selling a preferred stock is totally different than the actual value of the common stock because they get liquidation preferences. And so you may sell your pre-money value of the company, you own 100% of 10 million, you raise 10 million, so now you're 20 million, so now you're 50%. So you've been diluted 50%. But you own 50% of a $20 million company, so it's the same thing. That's 100% of it. But diluted funding is great. The issues with dilution, non-dilutive funding, like CPRIT, is that it's fantastic, but there are strings attached, right? Even CPRIT has strings attached. If you have a commercial success or service or product in CPRIT, you're gonna owe CPRIT 4 times the money that they gave you, plus a 0.5% royalty in perpetuity. So there's a revenue sharing component, but the great thing about CPRIT, it's so far in the future, it's gonna be someone else's problem. Because you're gonna sell the company.
That's my favorite kind of problem.
But, and then CPRIT also recently, on a transaction that I helped with a company called Onco Nano Medicine in Dallas, science came out of UT Southwestern. They have 3 CPRIT awards, almost 30 million in CPRIT funding. We took 18 million of that, put it into equity, which is great because now you don't have to get, the way CPRIT gives you money, they kind of spoon it out to you in advance, which is good. So, but they give it to you 50% of year one, 50%, you have to kind of go through that. So you still have to earn it effectively. Don't think that because you have a CPRIT award, the value of your company has gone up. That's a myth. So if you think I'm a $10 million pre-company, I've got CPRIT for 15 million, now I'm a $25 million company, not a chance. No investor is gonna say that you're a $25 million, because CPRIT money is not guaranteed. You still have to meet your goals and objectives. All right, we're getting to IP, sorry.
Excuse me, I have a question. What about donor money? So a rich family come and give you $3 million because a member of the family passed away exactly of the cancer that you are studying in your company. It was not on your list. So not CPRIT, not US government, but donor money, without strings.
Someone's giving you money?
Yeah.
Like because I believe in what you're pursuing, and they don't want any equity in return?
Yeah.
Dude, I'll take that money every day. So this is venture, have you guys heard of venture philanthropy? I mean, it's basically, and in cancer, you see it all the time. I mean, I laugh because I totally agree with you. Someone will give $100 million or $50 million to MD Anderson Foundation. They won't even think twice about it. You ask them for $1 million for your company, and they're like, I don't know if I can do that. Because giving money away is a lot harder than investing money for people that are high net worths. Investment is, I gotta make sure it's a good investment. If you can get a grant of money with nothing in return, I would do that all day long, every day, for my lifetime. But it's not common. Now, what I tend to see is that people that do that, they do have strings attached. They want you to pursue a certain area of research. And particularly in your lab, I mean, it's easier for them to give money to the institution for your lab to pursue technology. And there's a number of researchers in this TMC that, they've saved someone's life, and so now the family wants to donate to their lab to continue the research. Sometimes there are strings attached with those grants, either to the institution, usually to the institution. So if there's a molecule that's developed that maybe they want something in return if it's ever advanced. And I've seen that before, at MD Anderson and some of the other institutions.
So if this happens for a company, does this increase the value of the company?
I'm sorry?
So if this happens for a company, like the money is donated to the company, does this donation increase the value of the company?
I'm sorry.
Would it increase the value of the company if somebody gave you a bunch of money?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, clearly it goes to the cash available. Yeah, cash on hand. I mean, it definitely tracks the value. The thing about pre-money value, and she's a venture capitalist. She knows this. It's whatever you can raise. You want the highest pre-money that you can raise, and the highest pre-money you can raise, it doesn't come out of a book, of comps. That informs it. It's what someone will give you. And so if I had $3 million in cash right now, I would be timing my financing, because it's a matter of timing your financing when you will have data that will make you more attractive. And we all want to go into a dance and have all the girls for us guys, or guys for us girls, want to dance with you, right? You want to be oversubscribed. And so the cash definitely helps inform the value, but it also helps you time your financing to when you have the best data available.
Do you want the $3 million of value, or do you want to use it for something smart and get $10 million of value?
Bingo. Okay, so early days of a biotech, lots and lots of money. The IP acquisition, we are going to get to IP, I promise. There's the IP acquisition cost for a new co. And depending upon the institution, depending upon how hot the technology is, if there's other people going after it, I think as researchers wanting to license your own business, I am such an advocate for that, because no one is going to care more for it than you. And I could get off on a soapbox about some of the TTOs here in Texas, and some are better than the others. You'll see. But it's really important to have a relationship with your TTO. I cannot underemphasize that, and for them to know that they need to be your advocate, in any licensing deal, even if it's a licensing deal to you. Now, what they have to worry about is they have to protect the interests of the institution too, and so they can't just give you IP. It has to be what the commercial value is of it, and so if there are other bidders, like in this one deal we did a couple years ago, we had BMS wanted to license the deal. No, Celgene wanted to license the technology. This is the MD Anderson technology. And Celgene got acquired by BMS, and there was a competing product in BMS. So we had already priced it. So we knew what the licensing deal was going to be. And so we just went to the institution and said, all right, we're going to be close to what Celgene was going to offer. That we want to take it out. And so the institution had a comp that they could use in terms of, the initial fee, the upfront fee, the milestones, the royalties. And so it was pretty rich, but we had a great comp. And so we didn't get into this valuation, what's the true value? And what I've seen is problematic when you're dealing with TTOs is that the individuals that you're dealing with, whether it's MD Anderson, they have a general idea. MD Anderson's frankly better than most in their shop, because they have a pretty good understanding of value, and they have a high expectation of value. But a lot of them don't really know how to value the technology, so they'll hire a third-party consultant whose job is to try to get as much value as possible, and they tend to overreach. But another issue. So I do think as you're developing it, think in a 3-year time horizon, because that will help you think about, all right, the IP's in, I gotta do some preclinical studies, I gotta do GLP tox, I got an IND. What is going to be the event in that 3-year time horizon that's going to cause your bump? Your value, your IP is going to go up. Because still, even in the first 3 years of your company, your IP drives the value of the company. Now it's IP plus data, IP plus IND, IP plus clinical. But if you don't have good IP that has drawn a picket fence around the area that you're pursuing, you can't move forward. It just, you won't raise the money because they're gonna ding you on the IP. And so this is just, I'm just gonna, you can look at these slides later, but this just kind of goes through the early financing, the seed financing. You've been through this, how the company valuation is driven by, you know, your liquidation preferences for your preferred. So if you get preferred Series Seed, it's usually kind of the first preferred. A lot of people will go right past Series C, but Series C basically is like Series A, but it's without all the accoutrements that go with a preferred financing round. Usually has like a liquidation preference, not board, no board seats, no type of blocking rights, but it's preferred stock because you want to get that value in your company going as soon as the IP's in. So what we will tend to do is we'll start the companies off on day one with convertible debt. And you can raise that convertible debt, because you can even raise convertible debt from day one before your IP's in. So if you think about it, you form the company, you raise some money, you form the company, you issue all the founder shares. All the founder shares are at zero value, and they're the best shares to have as a founder because there's no cost to them. It's you get 10 million, 100% of the company, 10 million shares. You write a check for $10 because we're going to set the par value really low. You own it straight up at that point. There's no tax consequence. Then you bring the value into the company through the IP, and then from that point forward, it's issuing stock options at a value of the common, which is the 409A value. So you've been through all this, I'm sure. Happy to come back and give a discussion on this. So then the next kind of, after 3 years or even 2 to 3 years thereafter, you're starting to do more financings. As a founder, you're getting diluted, but there are ways in which to kind of keep from getting massive dilution. If you're a scientific advisory board member, like MD Anderson, you can't serve on the board of any companies unless you get president approval. Other institutions are okay with this. You can be on the board. So you can get option awards, and you can do consulting with the company where you can get options from the company. So even though you're getting diluted on your original founder shares, you can make that up with option awards by supporting and working with the company. And the company should be motivated to do that. All right, IP and licensing starting with the end in mind. So this is kind of back to where we're dialing back about the IP. What's the future funding of the company going to be? The timing, looking at that 3-year horizon, I think is super important to think about. What data do I need to get? How much money do I need to raise? How much? Do that before you're in the start, before you're in the starting blocks. Do that planning now. And then exit plans. So how can the first license help you get where you want? This business critical IP is so important. Everything is about the IP, the financial obligations, and we're going to talk about that with the upfronts, the milestones, the royalties, and different kind of components of an IP licensing agreement with your tech office. Okay, so I've mentioned the early engagement with the TTOs. Since this is being recorded, I will not say any names, places, or people. But I do know that there, and I've personally experienced, I probably work with every institution in the state of Texas that is licensing IP. Some are much better than others. Some just take forever to get anything through. The UT system generally has allocated responsibility to all of its entities. So whether it's MD Anderson, UT Southwestern, UT Health Science Center Houston, UT Health Science Center San Antonio, UT Austin, they all have been charged with the ability to negotiate deals. And I don't know if you guys haven't seen it, all their template licenses, the UT System General Counsel Office has those available. And so you should look at those, and they're kind of unique and different. MD Anderson does a different approach because MD Anderson really is probably is the leader on licensing out and tech deals amongst all the institutions. UT Southwestern is right behind it. And I think MD Anderson has very strong leadership that pushes that. Most of the other institutions, there's a lot of turnover in the TTOs. And so I talked about this, we talked about earlier, the IP that's created in the institution owns it. Under the IP policies, if you haven't read your IP policy of the institution you're in, you really need to look at it. Because it talks about, if you're doing disclosures with your, fellow inventors, that's going to be, the basis for any distribution to the inventors in the institution. So if the company pays an upfront of $1 million, and your institution, they'll take off the cost for the TTO, then they'll split it typically inventors, department, institution. And let's say the inventors get 40% of the net, so after the TTO takes off its expenses, and usually the TTO gets a sliver. Then it gets distributed to you, kind of based upon your disclosures. Now, it gets a little bit complicated if there's multiple patents and there's different inventors on different patents based upon disclosures, but really the disclosures are so important that you really think about that, because that $1 million now gets filtered back, kind of automatically per that formula. How many of you have read your IP policy of your institution? Good. There's also the issue in these policies that you need to think about with respect to equity. If the institution takes equity, how does that equity get distributed? And so I think you should also look at those as well. This kind of goes off, I can come back at some point in time when we can talk about institution IP policies. But sometimes if you get equity, it will nullify some of the other payments. So make sure that you understand that. I can tell you, recently there's no one from Baylor College of Medicine here. Nope. So I've read the Baylor IP policy, and you might as well read it 50 times and you still won't know what it says. It's a work of art, so to speak. But anyway, go on, find the policy, read it, know about it, know how it impacts you as an inventor. But that's a good thing though, that the institutions have those, because even though you're getting diluted, so let's the example we talked about where the IP comes from the institution directly into the NewCo, not through your LLC, you're not going to get zeroed out. Even if you may have get diluted in NewCo, there's still IP, there's still flow of economics that goes back through the institution to you. And so you kind of get in on both sides, even though you're getting diluted. But do not let your institution give away your IP. That's a big problem. If they do it for nothing, they give it away. Just back end it. A lot of the small startup companies, the biggest challenge with them is too much money for IP up front, when they're still trying to scramble to get money. So, but I always push for back-ended milestones, back-ended royalties, because if it's successful, you don't want to handicap the company early with big milestones, IND, GLP talks. Yes?
So opposite to the giveaway of the IP, the other one is that, so if you want to file your patent, but the institution doesn't want to do it, they don't feel it's valuable, but you still want to pursue. Is there any way to do it? Say, okay, since you don't want to do it, I want to do it myself. I want to start a company with myself. MDS, I think they are not really willing to do that, but.
So example, there's a company that I've worked with where some of the investigators are UT Southwest, UT San Antonio, or I'm gotta get it right, UT Health Science Center, San Antonio. I get in trouble every time I say UT San Antonio. And so the tech office passed. They took a pass on the technology. We said, all right, assign it right now. So the institution assigned the IP to the PI formed a company. And, because the biggest challenge is when you're dealing with the tech office is if you may have a great idea, if they don't want to carry it forward and file the IP and someone goes out there and publishes, you're hosed. And so that's why I'm saying you got to have that relationship with the office, and you sound like you are well informed on that. But yeah, I would get that assignment as soon as possible, and because these guys assigned us as a brain cancer treatment. They assign it to their own company. My client, which is a public company, Biotech, licensed it directly from their company. And so nothing is going back to UT Health Science Center San Antonio.
Excuse me, I can say something. So it happened to me. So you have to ask release of right to the company, but to the institution. Basically, they release the right to own the IP, and they give it you to do your own IP. The point is, if the IP is sold, the institutions have a policy in which you have to pay them a certain amount of money. So don't think that if they release the right to you and you sell it for 1 million, still you have to give them a set, which is not $10,000. And usually this happens, they give you the ROR quite late, few weeks before everything is falling to pieces. So really you have to be prepared to run like crazy to fill the patent, because sometimes they release it 2 weeks in advance. Good luck to do a patent in 2 weeks with lawyers and all the stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a very tricky way that they use when they really don't work.
It's a good point, and you've got to have relationships with people
Yeah.
that you can, once it's in your lap, you got to take it.
To be fair.
Yeah.
You have to go to lunches, to dinner with them, to smile, to thank them very much.
Well, I mean, your comment is like an advertisement for the whole ACT program. why you're doing
You
this?
have to be fun. Fun with it. With the mother one, you don't care.
Yes, sir.
Related question, when would be a good time to license out? Because there is some benefit actually to leave IP's institution. They pay for the maintenance, patent, etc. You need to be really.
Yeah.
I mean, even SBR, you don't necessarily need IP to be in the company, right?
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
The question was when timing about licensing it out versus leaving the institution, letting them continue to carry those patent costs.
Well, I mean, typically the institution, I mean, they're accumulating a debt, right? But they're paying the IP prosecution costs. So when you license it from them, you're gonna have to pay them back, right? So I think it's, the timing is all fact specific and IP specific. It's when there's enough progress in the technology to where you now really need to get it out of the lab. You need to get it into animal models. So the further you can take it in the lab, the better, right? I mean, because someone else is paying the cost, whether it's NIH or NCI, and like a Baylor College of Medicine company that I work with, which is now, it was VirusCyte, it's an allogeneic, virus-specific T-cell therapy. They got it through phase 2 in the clinic, and we took it out, and then that company then raised, in the course of 2 years, $400 million. Because it was really mature by the time it came out. Now but you also have to balance that with the glacial pace of how institutions work, right? Because it's all about speed. Once you get the technology out, bam, you can sprint with it. Whereas if you're in the institution or if you have federal funding, it's kind of a plodding process. So I mean, if you're developing new IP, again, I think it's specific. Like someone like Sarah, who sees a lot of IP, can say, now's the time, the market's hot, this is a fundable program. And so you need advisors that can help you like that. Okay, I'm gonna fast forward. We only have a few more slides, and actually, I can't believe it's been an hour and 15 minutes. So this is I got this from Ferran Pratt, who's the head of strategic industry ventures at MD Anderson. Of course, he loves this slide. And there was a big transaction that MD Anderson did in 2020, as many of you know. But this is the UT system is like off the charts, and a lot of this, maybe about that much of it is one deal, but it's this is important. And if you look at institutions, and I like to point to this slide when I'm talking to other institutions, is that your job as a TTO is to push technology out. Push it out. Do not nickel and dime people. And that's what they tend to do, because a lot of the TTOs are, oh, we gotta get this, we gotta get that, and you know, so that's why I think it's so important, because whenever I'm working with an investigator, you know, someone I go, if you wanna get your technology out, and you don't have a good relationship with your TTO, because we're gonna hit roadblocks as we're pulling it out, I'm gonna go to them, I'm gonna need you on the inside pressuring them, right? You go to the VP of research, the VP of research, and because you are their esteemed faculty, you're their esteemed researchers. If they want to continue to attract people from around the globe like you, they've got to show that there's value at the end of the process. And so this is important. This is important, you know. And so Rice University, which has amazing technology, I don't see much coming out of Rice, and I love Rice, don't get me wrong, but it's almost like it's not even in the discussion on biotech. And I know that Rice does a lot of things, and some of the nanotechnology is done really well, but this is a pretty interesting slide to just kind of people revel at. So your license, you know, I'm gonna just kind of bomb through this pretty quick and we can get to questions, but you know, you're licensing patents, any filed patents, and often what's more important is the know-how. That's everything that goes with the IP. That's all the studies that have been done in the lab notebooks, the data, the information. The company needs to have that in order to carry the IP forward. And so we'll go to some definitions that are really important definitions, but the economics basically fall into a couple simple buckets. There's the upfront licensing fee or equity or both. We just did a licensing deal where we had equity, because the institution wanted a couple $1 million in upfront. We're like, oh my gosh, this is a preclinical asset. How could we possibly pay that much money? So we chopped it down and we gave some equity to them. And we gave it in the form of convertible debt because we hadn't done our financing at that point. And so then, you know, we just flipped them right into equity and they, you know, got preferred and they liked that. The development and sales milestones, some of the things to be thinking about is, and I'm gonna get to the discussion on what is a licensed product. So you're licensing the IP, maybe it's a molecule, maybe it's a target, but eventually that's going to turn into a product or development product that's going to turn into a licensed product. And so all the milestones, development milestones may be, you know, kind of lower on the front end, you know, so filing an IND, 250K or whatever. Then you get first dosing of patient in a phase 1 trial, phase 2 trial, phase 3 trial. And so the key is to try to push all the milestones to later, to when you've actually proved that it's got value and it's doing well, because you're not getting to a phase 3 unless there's something exciting about this drug. And then the royalties are all back-ended. So the challenge with royalties, and I know a lot of you guys know this, is that if they're in an institution, they should be in the low single digits. If you're double digits coming out of an institution, you're gonna have a hard time selling this technology, because it's gonna be, the royalties, you may have to match it with some third-party royalty that comes in, say if it's a cell line or vector or some type of other combination formulation of the drug. So you don't know. And you may do another sub-licensing deal, you may do a China rights deal or an Asia rights deal, or an EU deal. Generally, I wouldn't split it up. EU and US should stay together because those are the two biggest markets, but Asia rights, you see a lot of those deals. And you really can't go into China unless you have a partner in China. So the China rights deals always seem to work best. Anyway, so these sales milestones, you may have development, double stacks of sales milestones. So I've got another example. I have a client that has IP that we licensed from a Texas institution for the core molecule, but in developing that molecule, we found that there is blocking IP at Sloan Kettering. So we had to go negotiate a deal with Sloan Kettering for some IP, because they had filed IP that potentially blocks, because we started here and we kind of navigated here in terms of where we think the best. So now I've got Sloan Kettering license, I've got the Texas license, I've got 2 milestones I gotta pay off, I got 2 royalties I have to pay. So you start getting these stacking, royalty stacking. So you guys know royalty stacking can be a big problem. So you wanna make sure, and we'll talk about it in a minute, maintenance fees, this just annoys me so much with a lot of these TTOs, is these maintenance fees just go to the tech office. I mean, it's just kind of for them and to make them feel good. You know, they can be modest, but if they start throwing big numbers out, you just have to push back. It's just kind of silly. Sub-licensing. So this is kind of the biggest issue I have seen with almost all the tech offices in terms of what their expectations are on sub-licensing. There's 2 components of sub-licensing. There's the actual percentage that you're going to pay them based upon the development of the technology. So it tends to be, if it's like pre-IND, they want about 25% sub-licensing fees. That's 25% of everything you get, they get, subject to what we're gonna talk about in a second in terms of what's sub-licensing consideration. But you gotta pay, these are always ratchet. They start high, the further you develop the drug, they go lower, right? Because now you've put more money into it. So if the institution handed you a phase 2 drug, they're gonna, and you go out and sub-license it immediately, you hold it for a day and you sub-license it, they're like, we get a piece of that. You know, even though you cut the deal, we get a piece of that. So they're gonna expect higher sub-licensing, you know, percentages. And so we always try to ratchet them down. So the goal is by the time you file for a BLA or an NDA, which means you're filing for marketing approval, that they're basically gone. A lot of them will try to keep 5% post-approval, but this is always a big negotiation here. The royalties could be, you know, I've also seen, you know, royalties for without a valid term. So let's say the patents have expired, but you're still selling the drug. You know, you have a step down in terms of the royalty because it's more about know-how than it is about the IP. And then also you can see different steps up and down based upon orphan drug status, things like that. But the sales milestones, these kind of go with the royalties. And you know, you'll see sales milestones, you know, 500 million in sales, you know, institution gets $10 million. And so these are usually pretty easy. These are the least argued point in the whole negotiation. It's usually here, here, and here. I mean, all the maintenance fees is kind of lame, but these start with the economics. Don't start with the license agreement because the economics are going to drive everything. If you're taking the entire field, all uses, human and animal, and you're taking all territory, you know, worldwide, which is what you want. If you're licensed IP, you want it all. You don't want the institution selling something to someone else. If you can get it all, you want it all. Then you want to control the IP prosecution. So that's an important component in the agreement. If it's a state of Texas system like A&M or UT, they cannot give it to you to prosecute, but they can allow you to bring in prosecution counsel that has to be AG approved to handle the prosecution. So they always have to have a hand in it because it's their IP, and potentially the institution may have to take it back if you don't develop it. You know, I didn't put it in here, but the other thing to be thinking about is the institutions, you see more savviness on the diligence milestones in a company-to-company licensing deal. Institutions are not always good about really understanding how drugs are developed, at least to TTOs, and what the diligence milestones should be. So pay attention to the diligence milestones. That means that when it's licensed to the company, file an IND within 3 years, you know, first patient dose within 5 years. You know, they kind of put those things in there. I always say, make sure that the timelines are way out there so that you, even if there's delays, you'll still try to hit them. And then a lot of times you'll have sponsored research agreements where you're cycling money back to your lab to do more work. And so you want to make sure that the IP up here, if you're developing a rising IP under here, it boom, flows right into your license. You don't want to have to go out and negotiate a new license or an amendment to the license with the institution. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm gonna skip that last slide. We're already an hour and a half almost. So key definitions, I talked about licensed product. That is your molecule that's now converted into a drug development product or drug development candidate that you're carrying forward. And you'll see the term licensed product used for all the milestones and royalties, things like that. Field definition, net sales. Oh my God, this is, I know you don't like legal documents to begin with, I'm sure. But when you get into a discussion on net sales, it's just like, let me go. I don't want to talk about this anymore. But it's so important because net sales are the sales of the technology with all these deductions. Because if you want to be able to deduct as much as possible from the sales, because that's less going back to the institution, because the royalties are based upon net sales. So it'll be 3% of net sales, 5% net sales. So there's always this discussion about what's included and what's excluded. I've got a client that has a very complicated manufacturing process. It's a radionucleotide. So we have to, get the isotope, get to nuclear pharmacy, it's all these transportation and manufacturing costs. We fought hard to keep net sales to exclude all that because it's such a expensive transportation and management. We talked about royalty term. Typically, this is going to be, the later of expiration of the IP or 10, 15, 20 years post-commercialization, first commercial sale. And then the royalty stacking, so third-party IP combination products, you get to take down the royalty that you're paying to the institution if you have to go get necessary IP to commercialize. So there's usually kind of a takedown, which will usually have a floor of you can't pay less than, so if I've got MD Anderson IP and I have to go get, something else to combine to commercialize my drug, I can cut MD Anderson's royalty down up to say 50% of what they would have otherwise gotten. So those are really important positions. I'm done. So, yes, sir.
I have a question. So, obviously there's a lot of economic costs when you negotiating these license. So is exclusive license option a better scenario?
The thing with license options is that you really kind of still have to negotiate the main terms of the deal, because you don't want to like get an option, pay for it, then a year and a half later, okay, I want to license it, and now you're stuck. You know more about the drug or about the technology. If you're not exercising the option because it didn't work out, right? You're exercising the option because it's really good, and so you effectively you still have to go through the core negotiation of what the economic terms will be, even in an option. Now, the only good thing about an option is if you can put off payments to the institution. So like an upfront. So, well, I want to option it, and then I'll get but then I'll get some time to exercise that option. The institutions won't give you a whole lot of time to have an option, because if they think there's someone else out there that wants it, they want to just do the deal and get it done. So I do think options have their place. I would say 80% of the deals I do not have options. It may have to do with options built into a license agreement with additional technology. So you get a right of first negotiation or right of first refusal for a rising IP or new IP that comes up. I see those.
Do we have time for one more question?
Hey, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so slightly unrelated to this, but in case of a provisional patent application, you are usually given 12 to 13 months to convert into PCT. Let's say if you have lack of resources somehow, if big players, a big pharma got into and they have the same technology protected, they have their IP, but you couldn't get it. Do you still have some options to protect it, or after 13 months of, expiration of the deadline?
That's more of a core IP question, which I'm not qualified to answer, but I think in terms of, you wanna, a lot of times where we have that kind of situation, so it's pharma has an IP and then you've got a provisional, and you're wanting to take it out, right?
Yeah.
Normally what we'll do for companies that will do kind of a prior art search, we won't do an FTO because they're just expensive, but you can get, but your investors are going to look at that. They're going to want to make sure that there's no competing IP, here's another thing, I'll just go on this real quick. So everybody understands what's going on in Sting in terms of the IP environment there. So Big Pharma wrote a massive, application on IP on covering everything Sting. I've got a client's got a Sting asset. We're like, we're potentially blocked by, I think it's Novartis or Merck, I can't remember. But our IP guys are saying there's no way they're going to get this thing proved. There's so many problems in all the claims. They're going to get all these claims thrown out. And so even though they're there, your technology may still have a chance, even though it's potentially blocked by this IP that hasn't gone to patent, but it's still under review. And so you kind of have to be taking a risk there. So investors have to know that, and so we ended up moving forward and finance the company because we don't think that the claims will survive.
There's gonna be more opportunity, we'll have to figure out some additional time to have Andrew come talk to us as much of his time as we can get from him, which is unfortunately not as much as I'd like sometimes, cause he's so valuable. But thank you so much, this has been awesome, Andrew. So, we have Larry in the back, so we're gonna take a quick, 5